Let's start with Transcendentalism, an idealistic movement that gained popularity in New England around 1836. Those who subscribed to the Transcendentalist lifestyle opposed materialism and valued free thinking and connection to nature. It's fair to say the movement had a net positive on the world. Transcendentalists in the mid 1800s advocated for the abolishment of slavery and women's rights when few others did. Three giants of American literature stand out as some of the most influential Transcendentalists. They are Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Walt Whitman. Emerson is considered the grandfather of Transcendentalism. He was an essayist, lecturer, philosopher, and poet. In 1837, Emerson delivered a speech entitled The American Scholar to Harvard's Phi Beta Kappa Society, a group of scholars. He begins with some quotable tidbits like, "The scholar is man thinking," and then talks about the influence of nature, the influence of published works, and the influence of action on man. The takeaway? Be original, go outside, and vacations are overrated. All you need is your mind. Emerson followed up on some of those ideas in 1841 when he published Self-Reliance, which basically urged each individual to avoid conformity and follow his or her own instincts and ideas. Now, around this time, a man named Henry David Thoreau was absorbing everything Emerson had to say and planning to take Transcendentalism to a whole new level. In the 1850s, Thoreau left civilized life behind and lived in a small cabin near Walden Pond for 2 years. In his book, a memoir entitled Walden, he details his experience living off the land and explains how one can live an everyday life charged with meaning by focusing on self-reliance and the beauty of nature. Let's skip ahead to the heyday of a poet named Walt Whitman. In 1855, Whitman published an anthology of poems called Leaves of Grass, including a poem called Song of Myself, in which he celebrates the human body and the joy of experiencing nature. He is considered by many the most influential American poet. After these men passed, Transcendentalism itself did not continue to spread, but its values of self-reliance and connection to nature influenced individuals long after the movement died. In 1966, Jon Krakauer published Into the Wild, a true story about a man named Christopher McCandless who abandoned his wealthy family and life to set out on an adventure in the Alaskan wilderness. Before Krakauer wrote the book, an article about McCandless's death in an old bus had caught the attention of many readers. McCandless would be classified as a naturalist, but the teachings of Emerson and Thoreau clearly inspired his way of life. Moving into Race in America, let's begin with the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an autobiography of the famous abolitionist and an account of his escape from slavery. This painful yet powerful memoir was published in 1845. It is a prime example of a slave narrative, a text which details the slave experience, the journey to freedom, and a call to action for abolitionism. The slave narrative is considered by some the first truly American genre of literature. Next up, we have our first piece of fiction, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Published in 1885, Twain's sequel to Tom Sawyer is described by some as a meta-adventure. The two-sentence summary goes something like this. A young boy named Huck fakes his death and sets off from his home in the Deep South. Along the way, he joins a runaway slave named Jim, whom he aids in his pursuit of freedom. Throughout the story, Twain seems to call the reader's attention to the absurdity and intensity of racism in the Deep South. In the latter half of our unit, we address two more fictional stories that deal with racial tension in a more recent context. Spike Lee's film, Do the Right Thing, details the events of one hot day in Brooklyn on which racial tension leads to the murder of a black man named Radio Raheem at the hands of the cops. At the end of the film, a young black man named Mookie throws a trash can through the window of a pizzeria owned by a white man, Sal, in response to Raheem's murder. His actions spark a riot and the destruction of the pizzeria. Viewers are left to wonder, did Mookie do the right thing in using violence, or should he have found a way to express himself peacefully? The 1984 drama prompts reflection about social justice issues like police brutality today. The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros deals with race in a different way than other texts we read. The fictional story, published in 1984, covers a year in the life of Esperanza, a Mexican-American girl living in a Chicago neighborhood, through a series of poetic vignettes. In this coming-of-age story, race is just one of the things Esperanza worries about. In a broad sense, the story is about her struggle to define herself and grow comfortable with her own identity. The text's strongest suit is its portrayal of the main character through tone and voice. The short chapters and seemingly insignificant chapter topics accurately capture the thoughts of an anxious, uncertain teenage girl. The streamlined punctuation gives a raw, unfiltered feeling to Esperanza's thoughts and experiences. Moving on to the poetry unit, we first looked at a poem called I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died by Emily Dickinson from the mid-1800s. Dickinson wrote many poems, but it is impossible to date them all because she kept them hidden away in her home where she stayed alone, and they were not discovered until after she died. Her reclusive nature is rather fitting with her subject matter. I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died is one of many poems that deal with somber themes like death. Additionally, Dickinson is known for her trademark style of poetry. She uses frequent caps, dashes, short lines, and rhyme scheme to manipulate the flow of her poems. Finally, we covered 3 poems by Langston Hughes. Hughes was an African-American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist who followed a literary genre called jazz poetry. The name alone is the best description. Many of his poems deal with themes of race and slavery. His poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, published in 1920, stretches from the earliest moments of human civilization all the way to American slavery, emphasizing that Black people have both witnessed and participated in the key moments in human history.